When you fall, you have two choices. You can either stay down or get back up. Unfortunately, sometimes you don't always know how to get back up. That's what I'm here for. Take my hand and let's rise together. Welcome to After You've Fallen. Okay, so here's my story. But again, forewarning, if you get queasy easily, don't listen to this episode. But okay, so to get even a glimpse at all of the pain and trauma that I deal with, I have to set the stage a little bit. It was my junior year in high school. I was living the life. I truly felt like I had it all. Lots of friends, great family, awesome grades with the smarts behind them, wonderful testimony of the gospel of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was a valued member on the debate team. I had a boyfriend who absolutely adored me, and I was happy, upbeat, and I had the world at my fingertips. What's more is that I had a pretty phenomenal 5-year plan. I was going to graduate high school with high honors, go straight to a prestigious university. My heart was set on Berkeley, get a bachelor's, then serve a full-time mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. While this plan is phenomenal, God decided to change it. It's very important that you know that I do not personally remember any of the following story. Everything I share are pieces that have been shared with me by various people. It was so traumatic that I literally cannot remember for various reasons, like being unconscious, a drug called Versed, and the natural effects trauma takes on our bodies. With 2 weeks left of my junior year, I left school and went to my sister's house. She had just bought some brand new motorbikes. She had invited me over to come and test them out, and of course I was going to go. So when I got to her house, we pulled out the new bikes and she was on her cycle. I got on the little 50cc bike and we went driving around her condominium complex. About the time that we were exiting the complex, my throttle broke. This created a loss of control, and as the bike accelerated, it could not be stopped. Unfortunately, I ended up going straight towards a backhoe. A backhoe is one of those big construction trucks with the long arm and the shovel at the end, the huge metal arm. Anyway, so at this point, all I could do was duck my head and hope to make it underneath said arm. I, however, was not so lucky. The bike ran into a stability wheel, propelling me headfirst into the thick metal arm. Fortunately, my panicked, shock-stricken sister was able to call 911 and get paramedics to the site. A key term as far as medical diagnoses is the Glascow Coma Score, or the GCS. And don't worry, I know that most of you have no idea what that is, so I'm going to tell you, because it is actually important to the gravity of the story. It is the way in which physicians and other medical professionals determine your likelihood of survivability. Let me illustrate how the GCS gets determined, and this is important to the story. There are 3 factors they look at when assessing someone's coma response. The first is eye-opening. If one spontaneously opens their eyes, they would receive a 4, aka they're doing fine. If they open or move their eyes in response to sound, they would receive a 3. If they move their eyes only in response to pressure, they get a 2. And finally, if they have no eye movement at all, they are given a 1. This is not a good sign, signaling that the hindbrain, this is the part of the brain that keeps you alive, don't worry, I'll talk about it in a later podcast, is not working. Additionally, it addresses the response of the peripheral nervous system. Again, I'll explain later. The second factor is verbal response. If one's responses are oriented and make sense, they would score a 5. However, if their responses are confused, delayed, or processing slower, said person would score a 4. If they are only able to respond in just words and not sentences, they would get a 3. Sounds a 2. And once again, if there is nothing, they would score a 1. Why you get a 1 when there's nothing is beyond me. So if the verbal response is not working, this indicates no communication between your big brain and your survival brain. The third and final factor is motor response. Motor response has a larger variability, so there are 6 scores. If one follows directions, they score a 6. If they can localize where the pain may be, For example, if you apply pressure somewhere, they score a 5. If they can bend things normally, a 4. If abnormal, flexing or bending, a 3. And if they are only extending, similar to stretching, they are given a 2. And once again, if there's no response at all, a 1 is given. Again, I don't know why you receive a 1 when there's 0 response as opposed to 0. Beyond me. But the motor response measures the integrity of the cerebral cortex, or the brain, and it also measures the combination of the brain and spinal cord, which is the central nervous system, which again is vital to life. So the lowest that you can score is a 3. The highest is a 15. If you score a 15, you're fine. You maybe had a slight concussion. Medically speaking, you get into the moderate TBI realm if you score between a 9 and a 12. Anything under 8 is considered severe. Receiving a Glascow Coma Score of 3 essentially means that you're already dead. And guess what score I got? Yep, I got a 3. Now, back to the story. The EMTs rushed me to the hospital in Provo. They also called my parents to alert them of the situation. My mom, unfortunately, was in Seattle taking care of grandkids. But my dad, on the other hand, was in Salt Lake City, so he dropped everything he was doing and left immediately to meet me at Utah Valley Hospital. At the hospital, they performed scans and tests to determine what the best procedure would be from there. They evaluated the results and concluded that there was nothing that they could do. I was still entirely unresponsive, except squeezing my dad's hand when he saw me. So the emergency doctors at Utah Valley decided to prepare me for a life flight to Primary Children's Hospital, where they had better trained doctors for both neurology and my small size. As I was being prepared for a life flight, apparently, I also called out for my sister. But those are the only 2 times I was responsive for the next 2 weeks. They performed similar tests at Primary Children's, and they came to the same conclusion. I was already gone. And even if they did anything, I would at most be a vegetable, but more likely brain dead and therefore clinically dead. Additionally, scans had shown that I was bleeding all around my brain, skull, and head. And this is bad news because straight up blood will kill your neurons or brain cells. So the doctors were about to say, sorry, she's already gone. This was until my dad arrived and told them that I had squeezed his hand. And when Dr. Marion Walker, the on-call neurosurgeon, heard that, he was convinced that I must still be in there. And oh, what a miracle it was that the world-renowned Dr. Walker was the one on call that day because of the gravity of the following surgery. My skull was broken from one ear to the other. Bleeding was occurring within the meninges, and no protocol ever recommends taking out as much skull as they needed to take out in my situation. They took out so much skull so that my brain could swell and heal. Our bodies are miraculous. As Dr. Walker has said, there are 3 things inside of your skull: your brain, blood, and cerebrospinal fluid. And if any one of those things decides to take up more space, your brain will have to intrude on the spinal column and it will kill you. Bless Dr. Walker's heart, he operated on me for hours. Unfortunately, it also meant that a 16-year-old girl had to have some of her favorite clothes cut off, her long, beautiful hair shaved completely bald, and a lifelong battle ahead of her. But as he has told me many times since, all we cared about was saving your life. After a very long surgery, my skull was removed and put in a freezer for 4.5 weeks. One of the absolute scariest things shortly after a traumatic brain injury is the intracranial pressures, or the ICPs. To try to manage the ICPs, the doctors put me in a medically induced coma and put every life function on a machine so that my brain would have the least amount of stress possible. My ICPs continued to be all over the place, but never a good sign, unfortunately. So doctors were constantly weary of my situation, wondering why I was being kept on life support. After numerous trials and errors, they were finally able to remove all of the coma drugs 10 days later. But even with that, still nothing changed. One doctor actually went to my parents and began to prepare them to live with a daughter in a vegetative state. It was after this, however, that the chief of staff, Dr. Chris Maloney, became such a big part in my recovery. Apparently, somehow, I seem to have a big impact on all of my doctors, even while I'm unconscious, because I must have connected with Dr. Maloney sometime during my coma, because when Dr. Maloney heard about the doctor who had told my parents what to prepare for, he came to the team of all the doctors, nurses, and techs working on my team and told them, stop looking at Shannon's numbers to know what to do with Shannon, but listen to Shannon. I literally had been lying still in bed without making a single movement, so it's not hard to fathom why things looked so grim. Each time anyone from the hospital staff would enter my room, they would poke me with a pin to see if they could get any response from me, and they never could. You can't forget the kind of person I was in my community now either, though, because on the other side of things, I had created quite a scene. Prayers were being offered in my behalf by each and every family member at each and every prayer all over the country. Both of my brothers flew to the state, albeit my eldest brother being in rigorous day-to-day med school. There was always a family member with me at the hospital. My blog, shannonblackham.blogspot.com, was being updated constantly, and people all over the ages were taking their faith to the next level. Many people at my high school actually even participated in a fast one day, enough that apparently the lunch ladies noticed, big time. And they all pulled a signature Shannon by wearing a tie to school. All of the combined faith, along with my strong determination, pulled through, because 4 grueling days after they removed all of the sedating drugs, they started to see solid improvement on the numbers measuring my brain responses. But you have to understand that coming out of a coma is absolutely nothing like it is portrayed in the movies. My eyes were still swollen really bad, and I couldn't open either of them fully for long after I got out of my coma. I wasn't speaking for a long time either. They saw better numbers, and I was able to be somewhat responsive. And this is how they actually determine whether or not someone is still in a coma. It wasn't until close to the very end of ICU that I would react to any of their pokes. I started to have ever so slight nods or shakes of my head. But the biggest, most miraculous movement I made was when they told me about my grades. An important thing to do with anyone in a coma is to continue to talk to them as if they can hear you. They could tell that I was understanding some of these things as it got closer and closer to 14 days in the hospital. Before my accident, I was obviously very smart and cared about my grades a lot. I mean, I checked Power School several times a day to see when I would get assignments entered and stay up to date on everything. This also means that at almost all times I had straight A's, as was the case when I got into my accident. I had straight A's, except, of course, some of the final projects that I had yet to turn in, but they were in my backpack. And because my family, friends, and teachers all knew me so well, they were able to pause my grades, allow my already completed final projects to be turned in, still graded fairly, and I received a 4.0 completing my junior year of high school. That is, I received a legitimate 4.0 while in a coma in a hospital an hour away. Anyway, when this news was told to me, they asked me if I understood, and they got their ever little subtle nod. Then with my right hand, I raised 4 fingers and then proceeded to shape my hand into an O shape. Everyone was absolutely thrilled. So, right after that, they moved me to the NTU. The NTU became my home for the next 5 weeks, so I have a special place in my heart for it, but I also hated the NTU. The NTU stands for Neurotrauma Unit. In the NTU, they barely let me breathe. They made me do therapy so stinking much. Even though it's not possible, it honestly felt like they were actually putting me through 80 hours of therapy a day. But then again, if we're being honest, my brain may have actually been enduring about that much therapy every day, because it's amazing how remarkable the brain is the more you learn about it. It was several days before I actually got out of bed, but the therapists were in my room, moving my arms and legs, working my cognition, and trying to improve my overall wakefulness. But literally as soon as I was able to be vertical, I'd have 2 therapists, one on each side, to help me stand and walk across the room. They should have started me with crawling, but I'll explain why in a later podcast. When I would do said walk, my head was as weak as an infant and could not stay up. I am not kidding at all when I say that my body had a complete reset and I had to start over from the very beginning. I had to relearn how to breathe, walk, talk, sit up, swallow, blink, think, close my eyes all the way, open my eyes all the way, hold my head up, control impulses, discover consequences, regain balance, learn my space in the world geographically, as well as socially, spiritually, mentally, etc. Oh, and of course, that's not to imply that I have mastered any of these things or that new things have not become issues, such as seeing, standing correctly, breathing, sleeping, even everything involved in pooping. And yes, don't worry, I will be talking about those in later podcasts. I know that I just mentioned that I'll talk about relearning to swallow in a future episode, but quickly, I have to mention that this is literally no joke. It's not a brush off the cuff type of comment. I literally had to try and fail at swallow studies for months and months before I could reach the next level of thickness or unthickness, which has led to my absolute love of just plain clear water. This is an episode you won't want to miss, even if you have no relation to it, just because of the funny stories I'll tell. There are some other things that were absolutely terrible in the hospital. Even though I can't remember much, the emotions that were very intense, which couldn't be shared, have not been forgotten. For example, in physical therapy, I was made to endure an assaulting game of Bop It, where they would throw balls at me. In occupational therapy, I discovered a lot of fun games that work your brain, help to keep you on your feet, and can prove that you're a lot smarter than therapists think that you are. And in speech therapy, I swore I had fluctuation in my dead monotone voice when I most definitely did not, to the point that I cannot even simulate what it sounded like today. But I was able to prove that I could still do calculus, albeit I was unable to do simple addition for longer than about 4 minutes. My story happened to be so miraculous that we would consistently have nurses, doctors, emergency responders, etc., stopping by my room just to check up on me, to remind them that their job was worth it. I had been given many, many priesthood blessings, and this has not stopped. I will most definitely discuss this and the power that God has restored to the earth in a later podcast. I was told that I chose to stay. I was told that I was being taken care of on the other side of the veil while I was in my coma. I was told that I would make a full recovery, but that I wouldn't be back to the person I was before. This frustrated me so much. I couldn't understand how I could make a full recovery without being the person I was before. Oh, how much I have learned. You will see how I've been able to make sense of this painful reality as you continue to watch or listen with me. Although there is much more to the entire story after the hospital, this next section is terribly hard to address, and therefore I cannot flesh it out in much detail. While I absolutely hated the hospital at the time, I had no idea the kind of pain and heartbreak that was ahead. I was completely ignorant that the last 7 weeks that I had spent in the hospital would be the last time I would feel any sense of protection. Just thinking about it brings so much pain and trauma to my mind that it's very hard to even think about. So needless to say, it was a long time in the hospital, and it was exhausting. I saw how I couldn't do simple things I had always been able to do, and was already grieving, even though I had not accepted that I had changed in any way, and it took years before I accepted that. And I also still feel like there are things that I should be able to do, but I can't. But I began to be relentless about going home. Any visitor I had, I would attempt to be sneaky and ask them to bring me home in front of my parents. I would create documents releasing me from the hospital and try to get any and every doctor to sign it. I asked what I needed to do to leave, and they'd tell me 5,000 calories for 3 days in a row, among a few other things. I did a spoonful of a 900 calorie smoothie and consider it as if I'd consumed all 900 calories. Although again, my brain truly was not working correctly, and I legitimately did think these things to be accurate. But I'd finally eat 5,000 calories just to throw it all up, but still want them to count it, etc. I became so focused, so determined on going home that became the only priority for me. Everything else went by the wayside, and I left the hospital 7 weeks after I went in. Honestly, it was too short given all that had happened, but at the time, I would not let it be any longer. Unfortunately, I had no idea how difficult the road ahead was going to be. Like I briefly mentioned earlier, I literally could not comprehend that anything was different. So my expectation was that I was going to go home and be able to play with my friends and continue to live the life I thought I was meant to live. But very shortly after I returned home, every single one of my friends abandoned me. I was confused and heartbroken. I felt betrayed and belittled to the point of dehumanization. As in, yes, I felt like people no longer saw me as even human. Peers no longer even acknowledged my existence. Medical professionals warned this of happening, but my family and myself thought that I would be the exception. But now, abandonment is my biggest trigger to the PTSD that naturally comes with a traumatic brain injury. Medical professionals also cautioned or directed us on other things too. For example, school. They told me not to go back to school for at least a couple of years, and even then, to only take the very easiest of classes. But do you think I listened to them? Nope, absolutely not. I was determined to finish my senior year of high school with my graduating class and take the 4 AP classes I had signed up for before the accident. I did end up dropping 1 AP class, but I took the other 3 with every minute amount of energy I could muster. My schedule ended up becoming the 3 AP classes and seminary, and that was it because I had no more energy. But grades have always been very important to me, and I wasn't going to let some stupid backhoe change who I was. Little did I know, that isn't exactly an option. So I worked all day, every day, with my dad and with teachers to earn a 4.0 my senior year of high school. Graduation was one of the worst experiences I've ever had. I went in for another surgery in July of 2011 and a few more over the years. I've also been in a mental hospital twice. Friends continue to be an enormous challenge for me. I have endured more physical pain than I can bear. I have sat through more emotional grief than any single human being should ever have to face. My Savior has rescued me in all of these times. I am not ashamed of my relationship with Christ, but I ask you to not accuse me of pushing him on others. Because I have experienced the strongest side of his atonement, I cannot dismiss when he has saved me. He has shown me time and time again that he loves us no matter what, even when I can't feel it, and even when I don't believe it. He has led me through times of darkness. Although I don't feel joy very often, my joy is always in the Lord. I am so grateful to know that I have a Savior, a Redeemer who came to this earth and felt my every single pain, heartache, loss, and abandonment. I know that every piece of life is part of a greater plan. There are still unknowns and questions in my mind, but I have to act on faith. I'm grateful to know that I can have faith in God, the Eternal Father, for the stuff that I don't know. I bear testimony of God the Father, his Son, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost. I know of their reality. I know of their love. And I know of Christ's everlasting and infinite atonement.